on the front row. If you remember Lily and Pat, she moved away and came back, and Pat brought her, so good to have them back this morning. I don't know if you know, we had a new person up on our worship team this morning, Eon. We thank you for being here. He's a friend of Rob's, and he brought him on in, so it's good to have another backup guitar here this morning, so that was terrific. Keep Rob's wife in prayer, Suzanne. She has a eye problem. She went for cataract operation on Tuesday, and it didn't go as it was supposed to go, so she's going back in this Tuesday for another operation, so please keep her in mind, if you would, as you go through the week. I had one more thing here. I think that's about it. Let's see. I just want to mention also tech. We lost a person up in tech. If you know, some things, sometimes the slide gets behind or whatever, and sometimes that's due to the fact that we don't have enough people up there handling things. We got somebody trying to do the sound and the tech and everything else all at the same time. So if you're a regular here and you'd like to take that as an opportunity, as a ministry, it involves a Wednesday night rehearsal and a Sunday morning, and they rotate every other week. So it would be an every other week responsibility on Wednesday night and also on Sunday morning then, say every other week. So if you'd like to join the tech team, that's great. We're in Ezra, right? Well, no. I wanted to fool you, yes. If you look at the slide here, we're going to the book of Esther. And why are we going to the book of Esther? Well, because between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7, there's 58 years. And during those 58 years, Esther takes place. So this is giving me problems again. Let me just see if I can. So what we're trying to do is, if we can take, we're going to go through chronologically. So for Ezra 1 through 6, the first two sermons, we saw the Israelites coming back to the land to build the temple. They built the temple in 515 BC, finally get that done. And Ezra chapter 7 picks up with Ezra coming back to teach them how to worship. But before he comes back 58 years later, back in Babylon and Persia, which is Iran and Iraq and so forth, today, they're winding up with another incident taking place. And so we're going to take Esther and move it to its chronological order. Typically in the Old Testament, Ezra and Nehemiah were one book in the Hebrew Bible. And then they put Esther after it because it was a separate book, and that's the best place to put it. They won't put it before Ezra or after Nehemiah. Where do you put it, So we're just going to put it right where it belongs, right between Ezra 6 and Ezra 7, and we're going to talk about Esther. And so we're going to be in Esther chapter 1 and 2. So if you'd like to find Esther, and if you found Ezra before, it's Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Esther. And we're going to look at her, and I was shocked to find out. I mean, after 34 years of ministry, I've preached through most of the books, I think all the books in the New Testament, except maybe one of the Gospels or two of the Gospels, because they're synoptics and they're kind of the same thing. And I've hit all the rest of the New Testament. I've hit a lot of the Old Testament, but I've never preached through Esther. So I don't know what happened. It kind of got missed over all those years. So this is new territory. And I got in the first two chapters and thought, this 2 chapters, I should have saved this for Pastor Scott. It's kind of a challenge, but Esther 1 and 2 has a lot of relationships to today, unfortunately, in the way we look at society. But it's backdrop. If you don't understand Esther 1 and 2, you're not going to understand Esther 3 through the end of the chapter. And so it's really kind of a neat thing. This is kind of the setup day when you find out about stuff and thinking, well, why does this matter? And what's the thing? And this is kind of puts an interesting situation. And maybe chapter 1 and 2 could be by itself and it ends. But chapter 1 and 2 are really a prelude for everything that's coming up. It's like a mystery. Maybe you watch some of these novels, watch something on TV, or if you read a novel, and you get through the first chapter and you get to the end of it, and all of a sudden think, wait, there was something in the beginning of this film that recognized this or this, and I'm more of a film guy than I'm a reading guy, so that's why I talk about films. But you think back to it, and you watch it a second time, and they say something, and Lois comes to watch the film later, and I say, watch these 3 seconds, or this 30 seconds here at the beginning, because it's going to make a difference way back in the end. Well, that's the way we are with Esther 1 and 2. Pay close attention, because some of the things, they seem rather insignificant. It just happens, and yet they make a difference as we go later on through the book. And we're going to take four weeks to look at Esther before we jump back into Ezra chapter 7. So take a look with me, if you will, the first 2 chapters. And I don't have a whole lot on your outlines today to write down, just the 4 points that we're going to go through. And partially of that is because it's just kind of hard for me to come through with it's a historical novel or not novel because novel is fiction novel. It's not a fiction novel. It's a nonfiction, you might say. But as you go through, it kind of gives a history, and you have to understand it. But the applications and the points and so forth doesn't divide up real easily. So I'm just going to go through the whole book. So I'd encourage you to find Ezra in your Bible. Do you have Ezra in your Bible there? What page is it? What page is it on the huh? Esther, yes, Esther, I'm sorry. That's one of the Pew Bibles? 354, okay. I thought I saw 354 in your Pew Bible. You want to follow through, okay? And there might be a couple different versions of the Pew Bible. I think we got a second edition coming out, and it might be a different page. But follow through on it because it's not going to be on the screen, and I'm not going to read every single thing to it. I'm going to describe it, and you're going to want to go through it as we're talking about it. So I'm going to give you the storyline, and I start off with the banquets of opulence. Opulence being, excessiveness and everything else. We're going to talk about the two banquets here. Now, the one banquet doesn't get very much notice, but this other banquet does. And so in verses 1 through 4, if you read this through, it says the person is Ahasuerus. Now, that's his Hebrew name, okay? His Greek name is Xerxes, okay? Xerxes. So Xerxes the first. That's what his name is. And he had the kingdom from India all the way down to Egypt. They'd conquered the entire area, one of the largest kingdoms ever, and it was the only place of existence at that point in time. And so they wound up having that whole area, and he has a big party. Now, he's going to eventually attack Greece in a couple of years after this particular story starts in the first few verses here. And so maybe they're coming together because they want to wind up plan the battle. Maybe he's just having another celebration. But anyway, he's got a 180-day celebration, almost like a World's Fair, showing off all the stuff that he has in the empire. And so it says you have 180 days of this thing, and then that goes through verse 4, and it says it displays the riches of his entire kingdom. So verses 1 through 4 is basically a World's Fair of his might, showing everybody what happened, saying, I'm so great, and maybe as they preparing the next conquest, he had a failed invasion of Greece in 480, and this is actually occurring 2 years before that. So perhaps this microphone's been a problem. I don't know how to fix this. It's the antenna, they tell me. They ordered a new one, but this is not going. Let me see if I can get this one thing down here a little bit. Pull it down and see if it stays out of the... I hate Louis. Hold it all, man. It's rubbing on something. Let me see if I can stay in my pocket. Is that better? I usually wear it in my pocket. They said, take it out of your pocket, put it in your belt. So I put it in my belt. Okay, we'll leave it in the pocket and see how long it goes. We'll see how that works. Anyway, so verses 1 through 4, verses 5 through 8, they have a banquet. Now, this is a real key part to it. If you look in verses 5 through 8, you start in verse 5, it says, in these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Susa, the capital. We said there might be 1,500 people coming to this banquet. Susa, the capital, was tremendous. When the Greeks finally conquered this, I think they'd take like 180 camels, and I forget how many others, in order just to carry the silver and gold out of Susa. I mean, this place was just filthy rich, and they were showing everything. When in verse 5, it talks about the court of the gardens. Then in verse 6, there were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of purple linen on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver. Imagine a whole couch of gold and silver. It'd be uncomfortable to sit on. I guess they have, kind of the whole couch with all these pads on it and so forth, and make it like a little soft. But mosaic pavements of porphyry and marble and mother of pearl and precious stuff. There were all kinds. Then they had drinks. Verse 7. The drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds. So the drinks weren't all the same. They had various different goblets of gold, so to show them how, you could pick it. I want this particular drink, and I want it in that vessel, because that's kind of a unique one. They had all kinds of different things they could eat it in. This was quite a banquet, you might say. And the drinking was done, in verse 8, according to the law. There was no compulsion, so you didn't have to drink. For so the king had given orders to each of his officials that he should do according to the desires of each person. So each person didn't have to drink, but they could drink as much as they want. There was no limit. So, a limitless bar. Maybe some of you have been to a wedding or some place where they had an open bar, drink as much as you want, and by the end of the day, what happens? Usually you have one or two that have drunk too much, in this bar. Well, I imagine in this part, they probably had a lot of people that had drunk too much. And this went on for 7 days long, if you can imagine, 7-day open bar. And so this is quite a banquet they have. Now, the men were doing this. The ladies were over with Vashti, the queen. And in verse 9 it says, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. So I'm sure her banquet was just as fancy. I mean, it's not the guys had all these other fine stuff and they were eating out of plastic cups over at the ladies' table, She was putting on a fancy banquet for all the wives and all the women too. They were having their good time and having a fancy time. So they have this big banquet coming up. Now, there are some things that I need to point out here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and give a little bit of the background of each one. Then I'm going to talk some contemporary issues, and this is where I'm going to get into trouble, okay? So I don't have a lot of notes here. So if I go off astray and start preaching about something, and it comes out wrong, we're going to have to take that off the tape maybe and keep on going. Because you get the meddling when you get into something like this, This is the way the Old Testament went. This is the way the people did things back there. And this is just accepted. You can imagine this banquet. I mean, you've seen some, I've not been to any of these myself kind of thing, but you see on TV, you see the team banquets where they take off the parents' house, over the parents' house, and the pool party and the drinks and the alcohol and everything else going out there. I don't know if that really happens. I've only seen it on TV, but I assume that there are some places like that in rich places. I'm assuming there are places like that where we wind up having too much to drink and stuff we do. And we wind up going and have excessive wealth, allows you to do a lot of stuff. And most of you say, well, I'm not excessively wealthy, but maybe you went over a friend's house or something, This just was over the top, this particular banquet, in what they were doing. And excessive wealth winds up with excessive debauchery. All kinds of problems, all kinds of things. And we're going to show in the next section as we look at it some of the results of what happened at this open bar, open banquet for 7 days, okay? Things get out of hand. And in fact, in this particular place, I think the thing that I see that sticks out in this is that he takes 2 whole verses to talk about the drinking and how that affects it. Now, some of you might say, well, Pastor, don't get on alcohol. When we first came here, our covenant said, people that our covenant is, we will abstain from the use and sale of alcohol as a beverage. We took that out of our covenant. You say, why, Pastor? You're trying to lower the standard? No, I really don't believe you can go in the scriptures and teach that no person can drink any alcohol. Some of the benefits, if you look at the New Testament of the Old Testament with Israel, was your vats will be filled with new wine. It was a symbol of having God's blessing in some ways. When the Jewish folks did their feast and so forth, they didn't bring grape juice. It was real wine. Okay, and in that part of the world at that time, water was not necessarily safe to drink all the time, and alcohol was a more appropriate way of making sure you stayed away from some of the worst things. And yet when you go in the scriptures and you look at it, except for those few times where it talks about that, almost every time it talks about alcohol, it talks about it in a negative sense. You read through Proverbs, don't look at it when it's wine. Cain shouldn't drink alcohol, and just don't drink it excess. It just goes all these different things. And to me, I think that the capulation that you have here of all of this stuff was the fact that they were excessively drinking the wine and the liquor. It flowed. When liquor flows, when you drink too much, you make what? Bad decisions, absolutely. You make bad decisions. I was in the Army. I couldn't believe this one day. In fact, I talked to the commander, and they changed it. They brought in some outside group that helped us because, all very concerned about, sexual harassment in the Army, And so they bring in this group, they're going to tell you about it, and they talk about, how women, the guys get, they have a few drinks, and then they bring in a few scenarios, and the person winds up having sex with the girl, and then they says, well, I didn't really want to have sex, and so forth. And what got me upset, and if this is going to be recorded, somebody get on my case about it, but what happened, what I was so upset about was they brought these people and say, well, when you do this, you should make sure that the before you go in and have your fling, that the girl in some way, records that she's willing to do this with you, so that after it happens, you don't wind up getting caught with, oh, well, I didn't want to have sex and you raped me, So get her signature beforehand or something, And I'm thinking, get their acknowledgement beforehand so that afterwards they can't back. And it's what they were teaching, At least that's what I got from it. Now, it may not come across that way in the thing, but that was the underlying thing, that you can't take the risk, because once you get you and the other person, whether it's talking to and there are girls in this audience too, because it's a mixed group now, in the Army, whether it's a girl or the guy, you get alcohol mixed in, and what happens? Bad stuff. And then all of a sudden afterwards, oh, I didn't want to do that, or I didn't have to. So make sure you're protected beforehand and all this other kind of stuff. Well, you know what? Why don't they talk about keep the alcohol where it should be? Don't let that get into your relationship. It helps you make bad decisions. And I'm sorry, I'm not pushing for, the way we used to have things with, prohibition or anything. But I'll tell you what. A few gangsters shooting some people over prohibition may not have been as bad as what we have today when you talk about the traffic accidents, the divorces, the abuse in the homes, the loss of work. You add all this stuff up, and people think, oh, this is a fine thing to do. And yet it still is affecting our society to the worst degree. Now, if you drink wine or something for when you go out for a celebration, I'm not condemning you or anything, but I'm just saying that you need to watch out, we need to watch out, because alcohol mixes with all kinds of bad stuff. And that's what happened here. It mixes with all kinds of bad stuff. And I'll go out on a limb here. Let me get myself in trouble again, okay? We've got, in Morrisville, we've got, 4 bars, I think, at least, in the downtown area. And we've got one, what should we call it? Adult establishment that serves alcohol, just a few hundred yards down the road here. And so we want to bring more business into Morrisville. And so I've been trying to get this building over here for years and years. People have been, and nobody knew that. I'm doing it under the radar, just see maybe Nehemiah a little bit. But we'll walk past this big building, this Lehigh rubber place over here, and someone will say, boy, that big on the youth center. We ought to buy that and have that and it has actually 2 times the space of what we have over there. It'd be a nice thing to have. So I've been working on that for years and years. And what happens? We had letters with them. We'd put in letters. The elders knew about it. A letter, hey, we want to buy this. And then I put one in personally. They went around us, sold it to somebody else, to my knowledge. And will they have a sign up there? We're going to have a microbrewery. That's what we need to solve Morrisville's problems, huh? Bring in more alcohol. And there was an elder from another church, not in town, but another church out of town, lives in town, says, this is fantastic. I just don't understand it. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to have, it's going to be the worst place in the world, but you know what? People think alcohol will solve problems, and alcohol doesn't solve your problems. Alcohol creates problems. And, it looks great. I've never drank, My wife and I, the only way we get out of Bulgaria one year when we were on a tour over in Israel, doing one of my things was going on a wine tour, So I took a little bit of bread and dipped it in the different wines, and maybe sucked a little bit of juice out of it. So I get it. That's my extent of wine. Oh no, I went to a Lutheran communion once and I had wine, because they use real wine in their communion. In fact, I went to 2 services in one night, so I had 2 things of wine from the communion in one night. So I'm a little topsy-turvy here, but all I'm saying is I can't say I've ever been in that position, But when you say, I'm going to drink, and it looks great, I keep on saying to Lois, how would I have to get before I'm not tempted to be an alcoholic, Because it looks so good. I'm just dying for the marriage feast of the Lamb. All I can eat, all I can drink, I'll never get drunk, I'll never get full, and I'll never get fat. What could you want more, It's just great. But, we just have to watch ourselves. And that was the part of the problem here. We go on. Number 2, verses 10 through 22, the demise of Vashti, Queen Vashti. What happens? Well, the storyline is, we look at verses 10 through 12. These drunken guys are out here, okay? And verses 10 through 12, on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, so we know it's right in the scriptures, merry with wine, meaning outright drunk. He commanded, and he lists all the different people, the eunuchs, who are males who have been castrated, so they couldn't have sex with the queen or any of the people there, had them, and they served them in his presence, bring Queen Vashti before the king and all these other guys and display her royal beauty. Now, maybe they egged her, maybe the other guys were egging them on. I don't know what the guys' talk was like. I don't know what was going on. But somehow they got to the point, well, let's have Queen Vashti, she's so beautiful. Let's bring her here and let her display her beauty. Now, were they planning on just her coming and looking at her beautiful dress and everything? I don't know. There's all kinds of discussions. Oops, there goes my notes. There's all kinds of discussion. Was it possibly that they wanted her to come naked? Was it they wanted her to take off some of her clothes? What did they want? Did she refuse because she didn't want to do that? She was too modest? Did she not go because she didn't want to go in front of a bunch of drunken slobs and not sure what was going to happen? I don't know what the reason was. But for some reason, she said no. Well, King Xerxes, who owned all this and had all this gold and silver, you don't say no to a king, or he's going to get ticked off. And he got upset. And so so in verses 10 through 12, it talks about her refusing to come. And it says, then in end of verse 12, the king became very angry and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood times, for it was the custom of the king to speak to his advisors, and they were close to him. And he lists the 7 princes again. According to law, what must be done with King Vashti because she did not obey the command of the king? And so they start discussing this back and forth between them. And verses 13 through 20, and I'm not going to read it. You want to read it while I'm talking, you can, or go back to it. Basically, they say she's going to depose her as queen. She shouldn't be queen anymore. If she won't obey the king, and everybody in the kingdom should obey the king, but especially his wife, if she won't obey him, then depose her as queen. And all the guys there that are drunk along with them, said, well, that's true, boy. If she won't obey you, what chance have we have in the home of managing or taking care of our own homes? They're just going to look at us with contempt. So something's got to be done with the queen, or all the kingdom is going to be. They made this a kingdom-wide problem is going to take place. And so they wind up deposing her as queen. It says, so in verse 20, the king's edict, which make a king's edict that'll be heard throughout the kingdom, that all women will give honor to their husbands. Let's make this a law. I don't know how you make that a law, but they're going to make that a law. The word please the king. Verse 22, so he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, and to every people and language, that every man should be the master of his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own, people. So use your own language in your own house. You should be, the man is the head of the home. That's what he's trying to say here. But they made a real big deal out of this, and she refused to go in. She lost her position as queen. So what does that mean as we look at this here? Well, there's a lot of things that we could talk about here, and I'm not going to go through them all. I'll throw a few ideas out for you to think that modern day stuff we should think about. One is human and sex trafficking. A king saying, "This is what the person should do," and you have no choice. You come in the exploitation of women, which is what he really wanted to do: exploit his wife as queen to all these other men. It happens all over the world today. Jonathan, I remember one of the papers they did out in Cedarville was on sex trafficking. I mean, that was a real concern of his. I don't even know that I ever saw the paper, but I just know he wrote a paper on it. That was an important thing. You have the idea of feminism and exploitation today. Feminism, well, everybody's equal. Women don't have to obey their husbands, and they shouldn't, we're all totally equal and everything. And I go on a number of things about that. I mean, you start putting women on the front battle lines of the army, and then you wind up with some of them getting captured, and you look at the way they treat women in the far east. It's not a good scenario. I don't know if you know one of the reporters, female reporters. I think it was a reporter that was captured. I read her story, and I think, but from what I could gather from the context, she was a Christian, but she was captured. She wound up being, and they thought that she was going to be released, but she got killed in one of those bomb raids right before being released, supposedly. But she had wound up being sold to a number of different Muslim men, and this is an American woman. sold enough in her captivity. So exploitation. See the feminists saying, oh, all women should be equal, and yet they're completely silent when it comes to an establishment like down the street where women are showing the bodies off every day. And we got prostitution. And we've got, there are women that are finding their livelihood in bars and every place else, all kinds of adult establishments, putting films, and you're saying, so these feminists are saying we should be equal, and yet they don't have to speak out against us at all. They say pornography is rampant amongst the entire United States. And women are almost the same, from what I hear, as men are. But they say 50% of men are addicted to pornography on the internet or whatever else. So I'm talking to somebody, I'm saying, well, that means either me or you, and it's not me, then it's you, 50%. That's a lot. That means how many guys we got here in the church, and women here, addicted to pornography. And yet that is what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone that's going to show off a woman's body in front of a bunch of drunken men for pleasure. Husband and wife relationships. Not even going to touch that a whole lot, except that on your notes there at the bottom, I put a number of passages that I think husbands and wives need to look at to say, what is our relationship in our family? Today we want everybody equal, so the husband's not the head of the home. But what does it mean to be the head of the home? It should be a loving husband. I think there's a lot of difficulties. Obviously, Xerxes didn't know how to love his wife, and between the two of them, they had some major issues. And today we wind up with, 50% divorce rate in the United States now? It's incredible. We don't have this down, possibly no better than Xerxes had it down. It's a real problem that we need to look at. And then there's the treatment of women, especially Christian women. When you look especially the Islamic countries, Christian women are looked at as infidels, and consequently, anything can be done with them. And I put a website down there if you want to type it in and read it. It talks about, it was just one that I happened to find when I was Googling for the sermon. I talked about some of the plight of women. Where in one of the instances, I think it was Pakistan, they just went in, they raped the girl because her mom converted to Christianity, and they were no longer protected by any laws or anything. So that's free go. And we sit here in a nice church and don't even think about it, because it doesn't happen here. But can you imagine what some of these countries are going through? It's incredible. Nigeria, the Boko Haram, the terrorist organization down there, 379 girls kidnapped, I think it was, and 200 and some still have not been released or found. Christian girls taken, sold off to other men. Can you imagine if your daughter, look around the auditorium here. Pick a girl, or think of your own family of some teenage girl. Can you imagine if somebody went into the house and stole that girl and you were never going to see her again, and you knew that was her plight, to be used by some man, and then sold when he got tired of, sold her to the next guy and sold her to the next guy, as often as that's what happens across in many of these lands. And yet we sit here, and I'm not sure, I'm as guilty as us. What are we doing about it? I don't know what we do about it, but we certainly, our society is not doing anything about it. So we look with condemnation sometimes at Xerxes, this fat, belligerent, drunk king who wants his wife to walk out, and yet we think that can't be happening in our society today, but it happens every day. And if we just want to walk a few blocks down here, we'll see girls exploited for their body parts, what they look like. So at any rate, we get to the third part here, chapter 2, the selection of a new queen. If you look at verse 3 of chapter 1 and verse 2 of chapter 16, you'll see that 4 years have gone by, from the 3rd year to the 7th year of the king. 4 years have gone by in this time period. And during this 4 years, he's gone on an escapade, this failed battle in Greece. He comes back, and he's been gone for a while now, comes back and figures, hey, I need a new queen. I'm not having a great time. And so what he does, you talk about exploitation of women. He talks to his guys in verses 1 through 4, and they decide on this beauty contest, Take all the girls in the kingdom, the most beautiful girls, probably teenage girls, I'm guessing maybe 14 to 18 or something like that, and just extract them, and we're going to have one-night stands. Give them all the cosmetics, and talks about all the different beauties and everything, treatments they'll put them through. And then at the end of the year, they wind up going into the king, have a one-night stand with the king. The king likes her, maybe she'll get queen. If he doesn't like her, she goes to a second harem, because they had two harems. The first harem was the harem where all the young girls were brought for their beauty treatments. They go have sex with the king for a night. If he says she's not my queen, she goes to the second harem and stays in there as basically a perpetual widow for the rest of her life, because they're not going to let anybody else marry her. And she stays there for the rest of her life unless the king decides he wants her back. That's the plight of these girls. That's what happened in this particular society. And we say, hard to hear, but that's what happened. Can you imagine if that happened here? But that's the society that they had. And so in verses 5 through 7, one of the girls that got scarfed up in this whole deal was Esther. She was a nice Jewish girl, orphan. Her uncle was raising her. Father and mother died. And so Esther gets caught up in this whole thing, and he says, look, don't tell them you're a Jew, whatever you do. Go there, but don't tell them you're a Jew. Just keep that under wraps. And so she goes in verses 8 through 14. They get all these cosmetics, and I was listening to one lady saying, boy, it's not while the situation is not very good, the treatments that they gave these ladies was pretty nice, Pampered them for a year, made them look beautiful, told them how to use the cosmetics. She had 7 maids to wait on her and help her look beautiful. That's her only task for a year. Look beautiful, enjoy yourself, bathe your skin, make it perfect. That's what happens. After the year, now you're going to go in. And I'm imagine getting taken away from the one person, the one relative she knows, was pretty dramatic for her. But she comes away from Mordecai, and she goes in, and she follows through all this stuff. And when it comes her turn to go into the king, she asks the guy who was her overseer, you might see, the harem, what should I take in? And she listens to him. Probably some good advice there, If you're going to do something, you should listen to the people that have been there before and know how to do it if they're wise. This guy was wise, evidently, and told her exactly what to do. She went in, and the king chose her. Says, you will be my next queen. I'm not sure that it was that night, but she went out, and he had a big banquet, it says in the following verses, choosing her as king and saying, Esther will be my new queen. Now, there's a lot of tragedy. There's a lot of opulence. There's a lot of trafficking, sex trafficking, and bad stuff happening in this passage, But as we look at what's taking place, it's kind of interesting as we look at the future. All of this is the plot as the basis for Esther. You say, how can anything good come from all of this? But it will. Hang with us for 3 more weeks as we look at what's there. We're glad to have Jim and Linda with us. They're from South Carolina or North Carolina? South Carolina. How long are you up here for? You have to listen on tape. They're going to miss lessons 2, 3, and 4. It'll come out okay, but all this stuff is happening for a reason. And Esther's involved in it all. I guess I should say, she stood out from all the other people. What made her stand out from all the other girls that had the same treatment? I don't know. I think maybe as a Jewish character, her dedication to faith, even though she knew she was going to be violated in a way that was not Jewish coming up, but she stood out from everybody else. She not only had outward beauty, but I think she had inward character. And for our young ladies in this audience here today, for you that have daughters, for you that have influence on people that have daughters, let me tell you, what made her stand up, it wasn't just that she was beautiful, but I think she stood out. And I have to ask, what makes our young ladies, should be young men also, but especially in this passage, our young ladies stand out from the rest. When you go to the shore, is your bikini just a little smaller than everyone else's? I'm a guy, okay? And I will tell you, short dresses, short pants, they look great on women with great legs, don't they? I shouldn't be saying that, should I? Well, my military has come out, so I got to be honest with you. Pastors don't talk about this stuff often. But if the guys in the military are going to look at me as real, they got to look at me as real, so I got to be able to talk to them straight. I'm talking to you straight. I'm saying when our daughters go out, our eyes are tough. It's hard for that Job, guy that says, I'm going to keep my eyes doing what they should be doing. You walk past the mall and you see Victoria's Secret, you can't go to the beach anymore. I went to a pool party, and I won't tell who it was or where it was. It wasn't in this church. But man, the bikinis and how much they showed, I'm sure Vashti might have been more clothed than they were at the pool party, Show everything today. What are we doing? What are we living? What is our testimony like? When we live our lives, whether it's girls or guys, what is our attire like? Are we drawing the wrong kind of crowd to us? Or are we drawing the right kind of crowd? How we dress, how we make ourselves up, how we appear to others is so important. And to Esther, it made a difference. And it probably wasn't because she wore the skimpiest outfit more than anybody else. The credibility of Mordecai, the last thing on the storyline here. Mordecai, verses 19 and 20, her uncle's sitting by the king's gate. So he's probably an official of some sort. The Jews made it high in the king's places sometimes. And so I'm thinking he's a king's official in some way, or he wouldn't be at the king's gate, because that's where they did business and so forth. So he's sitting at the king's gate, he's listening, and he discovers an assassination plot against Xerxes the king. And so as the story goes here, if you look at those few, he steps aside and he winds up, and I'll tell you, in the Old Testament, you look at the Old Testament, I don't know how many kings ever lived a long life. I don't think I'd want to be a king. The idea is just how many assassination attempts could you miss before you got killed? It's basically the way it went. Until your son or an enemy or somebody killed you off. Well, this was an assassination plot. Two guys were going to kill the king. Mordecai found out about it. He told Esther, look, these two guys are going to kill the king. They did an exploration, investigation, appointed special counsel. They did an investigation out, found out these guys were going to kill the king, and they hung them both, killed them. And Esther, when she told the king about it, she gave Mordecai the credit. And I said, that's kind of a stupid thing to put in the end of the second chapter with her talking about all this other thing, and Esther becoming king. It will make a very dramatic difference someplace later on in the book. And so all these things are happening, and they're backdrops. They're backdrops for what's taking place there, but it's also backdrops for us. As we get to the conclusion, because we only have a few minutes left, let me just give you three things that I think that you need to remember out in this here, and it's at the bottom. We'll throw them all at the same time. One, and this is the one I think this is important. You may not think it's important. Alcohol has few benefits other than the momentary pleasure that soon turns to unhappiness. Alcohol has few benefits other than the momentary pleasure that soon turns to unhappiness. Think of it: headaches, nausea, you see people throwing up after drinking too much, illness, cirrhosis of the liver, accidents, work loss, destruction. I mean, there's just so much bad benefits from it, you know. It's best to stay away from it. That's my advice. And I think this particular passage demonstrates some of the stupid stuff that got done when these guys were inebriated. Secondly, God orchestrates world affairs to benefit his people and his plan. God orchestrates world affairs to benefit his people and his plan. When Vashti refused to perform for the king, nobody could have foreseen how that one decision would impact the Jews' very existence. The Jews were saved because of this one act. Vashti saying, I'm not going to perform. Without this incident, what chance would there have been of a little young Jewish girl becoming queen of the kingdom? Wouldn't have happened. Third, difficult circumstances can bring glory to God if we keep the faith. Esther was ripped from her home, taken away from the one relative she still had that loved her, put in a harem where she knew that her whole goal of being there was to wind up having sex with the king, and yet she kept the faith, kept her faith. And as circumstances come bad for you, regardless of what they are, there's one thing you got to remember: keep the faith. No matter how bad the circumstances get in your life, in our country's life, in the world, no matter how bad it gets, keep the faith. Because no matter how bad circumstances get, we can bring glory to God. Dear Heavenly Father, as we look through the rest of Esther, may we be encouraged to just see your work. Even though your name's not even mentioned once in this book, we thank you that you can teach us so many lessons from here. Help us to move forward, to do what you want us to do, and to just take some of this modern stuff that's in our world today that almost seems normative compared to what they had even back then. And may we just kind of in our own minds try to stay away from the stuff that will take us in the wrong direction. May we keep your word in focus for us. In Jesus' name, amen.